Good afternoon, everyone. I am Marilyn Schaefer, Secretary of Advocates for Service Animal Partners. I will be one of your moderators for today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded. Participation in this webinar implies an agreement to and authorization for such recording in compliance with state and federal laws. The information provided during this webinar is intended for educational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. This webinar is closed captioned for the hearing impaired. All participants are muted and cannot unmute themselves. Questions should be put in the chat and the moderator will monitor the chat and ask the questions. If for some reason you cannot access chat, you can send an email to advocacy411@gmail.com with the word question in the subject line. All questions should be relevant to the subject matter of this webinar. Questions will be answered at the end of the webinar in order to honor our commitment to a 1-hour presentation. Advocates for Service Animal Partners is the only organization dedicated exclusively to supporting, enhancing, and protecting the civil rights of disabled individuals who use service animals to mitigate their disability and live full, productive, and independent lives. Advocates for Service Animal Partners operates ASAP 211, a 24-hour information and resource hotline to provide service animal handlers and businesses real-time, on-demand intervention and mediation of challenges faced as the result of the choice to use a service dog. You can access the hotline by calling 855-ASAP-211. That's 855-272-7211. Advocates for Service Animal Partners also provides policymaking services, implementation of standard operating procedures, and in-service training on a fee-for-service basis. For more information, please call the ASAP office at 386-272-7411 or email advocacy411@gmail.com. Marion Guysala is the founder of Advocates for Service Animal Partners. Marion possesses a Master of Science degree in mental health counseling with additional graduate study in rehabilitation counseling and has spent 15 years in private practice as a hypnotherapist. Marion is a published author, accomplished published speaker, and experienced workshop facilitator in the areas of psychosocial aspects of disability, service animal advocacy and policy, and legal issues related to the use of service animals. Marion has been blind since 1983 as the result of retinitis pigmentosa and has been a guide dog handler since 1987. He is currently working his 5th guide dog, a blue Merle smooth coat collie from Freedom Guide Dogs for the Blind. Marion has been involved in several high-profile cases, both as a complainant and an advocate. He has been instrumental in creating civil rights legislation in several states and is a recognized leader in the blindness and service dog handlers movements. Marion blends his knowledge and real-life experience with a touch of humor to help others overcome their perceived limitations, as well as underscore the need for increased awareness and more effective enforcement of the laws designed to allow all citizens, including those who are disabled, to more fully participate in society on terms of equality. His clients have included Hillsborough County, Hillsborough Area Regional Transit Authority, Miami-Dade County, St. Petersburg College, the University of South Florida, the Center for Urban Transportation Research, Qatar, Johns Hopkins University Hospital, the Illinois Attorney General's Office, the Wichita Transit Authority, and Zoo Tampa at Lowry Park. I give you Marion Guysala.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. And thanks to everyone joining the meeting. We appreciate your attendance and hope you get a lot out of this. I'd like to start by recognizing a couple organizations and individuals who have helped to make this webinar possible today. including Santiago Carrada and Belinda Allen from Visit Tampa Bay, and Bob Morrison from the Hillsborough County Hotel and Motel Association. We have a pretty diverse group of people on this call today. We have, for instance, some service animal handlers. In fact, we have quite a few service animal handlers that have signed up for this in the 8 o'clock. We have several general managers from hotels and restaurants, including some of their staff, transportation providers, some ADA coordinators, and a variety of other people representing various different public and private organizations. Our goal is to provide a broad overview of the Americans with Disabilities Act as it pertains to individuals who use service animals. And we'll try to answer as many of the questions and provide as much information as possible, but this is a broad overview. And so sometimes we may not get into the very specifics of your particular business. If you do have questions about that, you feel free to get in touch with us through our website or by email or by giving us a call. And we'd be happy to help you out with all of those questions. So let's talk a little bit about the Americans with Disabilities Act and give you a little bit of history of it. We're going to start back in 1964. In 1964, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This act provided for prohibition of discrimination based upon certain characteristics, including characteristics such as race, color, religion, ethnicity, and gender, but it did not include individuals with disabilities. So in 1981, President Ronald Reagan appointed Justin Dart to be the vice chair of the National Council on Disability. Justin Dart is referred to many times as the father of the ADA. When Justin was a young boy, he contracted polio, and the doctors only gave him like 3 or 4 days to live. However, he did survive his polio, but was unable to walk. So Justin used a wheelchair for independent mobility. On May 9th, 1989, Senator Tom Harkin introduced a bill which would later become the Americans with Disabilities Act. The ADA was signed into law on July 26, 1990 by President George H.W. Bush.
And now I sign legislation which takes a sledgehammer to another wall, one which has for too many generations separated Americans with disabilities from the freedom they could glimpse but not grasp. And once again, we rejoice as this barrier falls, proclaiming together, we will not accept, we will not excuse, we will not tolerate discrimination in America.
I don't care how many times I watch that video, it still chokes me up because I remember that day watching on C-SPAN as President Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act, which many of us fought very hard to have and to get enacted. So the Americans with Disabilities Act has 5 what we call titles or chapters, and each one of these titles focuses upon a specific area of discrimination. Title I focuses upon employment discrimination and is enforced by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Title II focuses on public entities or governmental entities, state governments, municipalities, counties, cities, but does not include the federal government. The federal government is subject to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Title III, which is going to be the primary focus of our discussion today, is focused upon private entities that provide public accommodations. And Title II and III are both under the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice or the Department of Transportation, depending upon what type of entity it is. Title IV focuses upon telecommunications and is administered and enforced by the Federal Communications Commission. And Title V contains what we call miscellaneous provisions. We're going to focus mostly, as I said, upon Title III, though the implementing regulations of Title II and III are very, very similar and provide very similar protections and regulations to govern that. So at a very basic level, what the Americans with Disabilities Act and Titles II and III of the Americans with Disabilities Act provides is that a public entity or a private organization that provides public accommodations are required to modify their policies, practices, and procedures so that individuals with disabilities have the same access to the goods and services as other members of the general public, unless that allowing them to do so would either create an undue burden, which is a significant difficulty or expense, or causes a direct threat, which is a significant risk to the health or safety of others that cannot be eliminated by a reasonable modification of policies, practices, or procedures. Now, what is a public accommodation? The implementing regulations of the Americans with Disabilities Act defines 12 broad categories of public accommodations, and they include inns, hotels, and other places of lodging, restaurants, bars, lounges, and other places which serve food and drink, retail establishments, theaters, gymnasiums, medical facilities, retail stores. Basically, we can lump them all into one broad category, and that's any place in which the general public is invited. So if the public is invited to a specific place, that place is a place of public accommodation and must modify their policies, practices, and procedures so that individuals with disabilities are able to enjoy the goods and services of that place of public accommodation on equal terms as their non-disabled peers. Now, some organizations are exempt from the Americans with Disabilities Act. For instance, religious organizations, churches, are not subject to the provisions of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Neither are private clubs. Now, private clubs are organizations that have some sort of a meaningful condition for joining the organization and are providing their goods, their services, and their facilities only to members or guests of members. However, there are some exceptions to that rule. For instance, if a church provides a food pantry, then that food pantry, while it is in operation and the space that it occupies, is subject to the conditions of the Americans with Disabilities Act. If a private club opens its doors for such as a graduation ceremony where a school might rent the hall so that they can have a graduation ceremony. During that graduation ceremony, that private club then becomes a place of public accommodation. Now, even though some stores call themselves membership organizations, stores like Costco and Sam's and BJ's, that is not a private club because anyone who pays the fee is allowed to be a member. And so they are subject to the conditions and regulations of the Americans with Disabilities Act and its implementing regulations. So we're here to talk a little bit about service animals. So what exactly is a service animal? A service animal is any dog that has been individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of an individual with a disability. So there are three key elements. One is that it is a dog, and there is one exception to that. We'll discuss that shortly. That the dog is trained to perform tasks or do work, and that the tasks or the work that they perform benefit an individual with a disability. So only individuals with disabilities have the right to be accompanied by a service animal that is trained to do that work or perform tasks. So I can't give my guide dog to my sister, for instance, who is not disabled, and she does not have the right to take my dog into a public place. Now, one of the things I hear a lot of service dog handlers say is, my dog has a right to be here. And the technical answer to that is, no, your dog does not have a right to be here. You as a disabled person have a right to be accompanied by the service dog. So only disabled individuals have the right to be accompanied by a service dog. Now, when we say that the dog has been trained to perform tasks or do work for the benefit of a person with a disability, these include such things as a physical disability, a sensory disability, a psychiatric disability, an intellectual disability, or an other mental disability. The regulations specifically say that no other species of animal, wild or domestic, trained or untrained, are service animals for the purpose of this definition. The work or tasks that the dog has been trained to perform must be directly related to the individual's disability. So just because a dog is trained to, say, sit or lay down or roll over or speak or give you your paw and shake hands, those are not trained tasks that benefit an individual with a disability. The work or task must be directly related to the individual's disability. Examples of work or tasks that dogs are trained to perform are assisting persons who are blind with navigation and other tasks, alerting individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing to the presence of people or other sounds, providing non-violent protection or rescue work, pulling a wheelchair, assisting an individual during a seizure, alerting an individual to the presence of allergens, retrieving and picking up dropped items, providing physical support or assistance with balance or stability to individuals with mobility impairments, and helping persons with psychological or neurological disabilities by interrupting compulsive or destructive behaviors. The crime deterrent effect of the animal is not a trained task and is not considered a service animal. Neither is the provision of emotional support or well-being. So the emotional support animals are an animal that simply by its presence helps an individual, calms an individual, or as it says, provides emotional support, does not qualify a dog as a service animal, because those are not trained tasks. Those are what they call innate opportunities or innate comfort that the individual receives from the presence of the service animal or the animal. Now, the exception to that is a miniature horse. We had talked about only dogs, but there is an exception to that, and that exception is for miniature horses. However, a miniature horse, the public accommodation must be able to accommodate the size and the weight of the miniature horse. The handler must have direct control of the miniature horse. The miniature horse must be housebroken, and the miniature horse cannot compromise legitimate safety concerns. So how do you determine if an animal is a service animal? Well, if we go back to the definition and we say that a service animal is a dog that's individually trained to perform tasks or do work for the benefit of a person with a disability, there are two questions that can be asked in order to determine whether the dog or the miniature horse is a service animal. The first question is this a service animal required because of a disability? Remember, only disabled people are allowed to be accompanied by a service animal. So is this a service animal required because of a disability? And what work or tasks has the animal been trained to perform? You can't ask about the nature of the disability, and you can't ask for a demonstration of the type of work that the animal is trained to perform. Also, you can't ask for any sort of documentation. Now, service animal users sometimes do carry documentation. However, documentation is not required as a condition of access, and the Department of Justice does not recognize the presentation of documentation as proof that the animal has been trained. So when you ask the questions, what sort of responses are you looking for? This is what is known as credible assurance. Credible assurance means, are the answers to the questions believable? And is the behavior of the dog believable as a service animal? In other words, is it behaving as a trained service animal would behave? So what we're going to do is we're going to play a little video. And I want you to pay attention to this video because I want to underscore the need for this credible assurance. So while we're playing the video, pay attention to this. I mentioned that emotional support is not a trained task. So if someone says, my dog provides me emotional support, that is not a service animal because that is not a trained task, but an innate capacity of the dog. The person presents identification, and we're going to talk about the identification that this person provides, but the person provides identification as proof that the dog has been trained, but refuses to answer the questions. States the dog has undergone 120 hours of training to be a service dog, but again, never tells the individual asking the question what type of work or task the dog was trained to perform. And throughout it, you'll hear this individual, the person at the gate, this is at a baseball field, giving examples of the type of tasks that the dog could be trained to perform, offering this woman an opportunity to say, oh, my dog does that. But even those prompts weren't enough for her to answer the questions with credible assurance. So here we go. We're going to run the video and pay attention to these things.
Service animal, I have her card right here. Okay, but it's not.
I'm allowed two questions. I'm allowed to do two questions, okay? One, is the dog needed for physical or mental disability?
She is, yes.
What
I have
is the dog?
PTSD.
Okay, what is the dog specifically trained to
Because
do?
I have PTSD, she provides emotional support.
No. That's
She's
not
registered.
specifically trained to do anything. I've got the ADA rules right here.
Okay, but she is, and I do have a right for psychiatric reasons to have her registered as a service dog.
Okay. But a service dog is trained to do a specific act, i.e. it senses an anxiety attack, it licks your cheek.
Okay,
Just
and
being
that's what I
there is
told
not-
you. I told you I have
You told
PTSD, and
me
she provides support for that.
Only she provides that's not a training. It's not trained.
Okay, she is. She went through 120 hours of training, and that's how I have her registered through the USSDR.
What specific act is the dog
I
trained
explained to you
perform?
what specific act she's
You
performed
said
for
it
training.
provides emotional support. I'm saying what
I'm
specific
showing
act?
you, she has a
Okay,
service
ma'am,
dog vest. I'm showing you she is registered with the USSDR. I've brought her in here before. I have PTSD. It's on file. She's went through 120 hours of training to be trained as a service dog.
Okay. Or emotional support.
She's
therapy
not an
helper?
emotional support
You
dog.
told me she was.
I told you what she provides is emotional support. I told you what she provides is emotional support. She is a registered service dog with the USSDR. I have her card right here to prove it.
The dog must be trained to take
She's went through 120 hours of training. That's how she's registered with the
Let
USSDR.
me finish this, okay?
Okay.
To train to take a specific action when needed
Okay.
to assist the person with a disability, i.e. a person with disabilities has a dog to alert him when the blood sugar reaches higher levels. A person with depression may have a dog that's trained to remind her to take medication. With epilepsy, may be trained to detect the onset of a seizure. Okay?
Okay.
But
No, what she is trained for is emotional support.
that's not.
Because I have PTSD, I am allowed to have her registered because of psychiatric reasons. She has went through the 120 hours of training. That's how she's registered with USSDR.
Okay, so I want to clarify this USSDR. That is the United States Service Dog Registry. This is an organization that if you answer a few questions on their questionnaire, will send you an identification card that verifies that your dog has been registered as a service dog. They don't train service dogs. They provide these cards on a fee basis, and anyone who fills out the questionnaire can get this registration, so to speak, and this identification card from the United States Service Dog Registry. Again, the presence of a documentation of any type does not convey any privileges under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Department of Justice specifically states in their frequently asked questions about service animals that documentation does not convey any rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So again, individuals with service animals cannot be required to comply with restrictions that are imposed upon individuals with pets. So for instance, we have several staff members from a few hotels here, because the Visit Tampa Bay and the Hillsborough County Hotel and Motel Association helped us disseminate this. There may be hotels which have pet-friendly policies, and they allow pets to stay in their hotel. However, individuals with pets can be restricted from going to the pool decks, going to fitness centers. Some may be required to stay only in their room and may not enter any floor other than the pet-friendly floor, and can be and are not allowed in places where food and beverages are served. Those rules do not apply to individuals with service animals. An individual with a service animal has a right to go on any floor of the hotel, go to the pool deck, go to the fitness center, go to any other room, and enter into the restaurants or any place where food and beverage are served. So we're talking about the rights of individuals with service animals, but along with every right comes certain responsibilities. And that's true for people who are disabled and people who use service animals to mitigate their disability. First of all, the animal must be under the direct control of the handler. What that means is that the dog must be kept on a harness, a leash, or a tether, unless the presence of a harness, leash, or tether interferes with the kind of work that the dog is trained to perform. For instance, an individual with post-traumatic stress may have a dog that enters into a space, checks the space, and makes sure it is clear of anything that could trigger a traumatic response. While the dog is performing that task, it may be required to be off leash as it scans through the area. But when it comes back to the handler to indicate that it is safe to enter, then the handler will put the dog on a leash and enter into the space. The dog should not bark or growl when unprovoked, or be otherwise disruptive to the conduct of business. So a dog that barks repeatedly in a theater or growls at someone in the lobby of a hotel can be excluded from that place. The dog must be housebroken. The dog may not block an aisle. And again, the dog cannot pose a direct threat. Again, a direct threat means a significant risk to the health or safety of others that cannot be eliminated by a reasonable modification of policies, practices, or procedures. In a restaurant, a service dog may not sit on the seat or be fed from the table of a restaurant. May not be allowed in the restaurant in areas of food preparation, such as the kitchen. Now, a buffet line is not an area of food preparation, and the dog must be allowed to accompany its disabled handler through a buffet line. And it does not include areas in which food is actually prepared at the patron's tables. In a hotel room, because the dog must be under the direct control of its handler at all times, hotels may require individuals, or I should say prohibit individuals from leaving their dogs unattended in a hotel room. Now, I want to say that just because the rules say that they may not, does not say they shall not. They say they may not. In other words, it's a little more permissive. The other day, I got a call on the hotline from an individual who's going to Key West, and he's going to be going parasailing. Now, I don't know about some of you service dog handlers, but I don't think my dog would do very well on a parasailing trip. I think the height was kind of scare him a little bit, but he wasn't going to take his dog with him, but he had nobody else to care for the dog while he was parasailing. So, he couldn't take him in the boat. The boat was too small for the dog. So the hotel said that he couldn't leave his dog unattended. So my suggestion to him was to go talk to the general manager and explain to them what they were doing. Basically, this person had graduated from college 2 years ago during the pandemic, and the graduation present at the time was that they were going to go to Key West. Well, the pandemic came and they never went to Key West. So now they're getting the opportunity to go to Key West, and he wants to go parasailing. So I suggested he talk to the general manager and make an arrangement that he would be allowed to leave his dog unattended in the room, and that he would agree that he would be liable for any damage that the dog causes. Now, that is just a standard part of the Americans with Disabilities Act, but in this case, he wanted to use that as a reasonable modification of the policies, practices, and procedures so that he could go and take his parasailing trip. In other words, if a dog causes any sort of damage, the individual with the disability is liable for the damage and can be required to pay for any damage that the dog happens to do. Now, also, just as dogs are not allowed to sit on the seats or be fed from the table of a restaurant, dogs are also not allowed to occupy a seat on public transportation or on taxi cabs. They're not allowed to sit in grocery carts. So many times I'm at a retail store and someone has their quote service dog in a grocery cart, and I'm telling you, individuals with service animals know that they're not allowed to put their dogs in grocery carts, and so a dog in a grocery cart can be looked at as not being a service animal. We say among us as service animal handlers, we always say 4 on the floor. In other words, our dog should be on the floor. Now there's an exception to that, and that is that one of the tasks that a dog can be trained to perform is to detect changes in blood sugar levels for the individual. So in order to do that, the person may have a small dog that they keep on a pouch on their chest so that the dog has the ability to smell the individual's breath, because that is the way the dog detects changes in blood sugar, is by smelling the person's breath. So in those cases, the dog will be kept on a pouch, a harness that is attached to the chest of the individual. Public accommodations are not required to provide any sort of care for the dog. They're not required to feed the dog, and they're not required to toilet a dog. So for instance, let's say I go to a medical facility and I'm going to be getting x-rays or go through an MRI. While I'm getting the x-ray and the MRI, I cannot be under direct control of my dog. So that medical facility has the right to say you cannot bring your dog into the medical facility because we are not required to care for the dog. So that's something that a person with a disability, I generally say to people who use service dogs, don't give advance notice, because you give advance notice to a place of public accommodation, you're just opening yourself up to discrimination. Maybe the discrimination isn't intentional, but what the place of public accommodation will say, well, he told me, she told me they're coming with a service dog. There must be something I can do. And so they go through, well, geez, man, maybe we need to do this, or maybe we need to do that, or when they get here, this is what we'll do. So there are exceptions to that broad piece of advice that I offer, and medical facilities where you may not be able to maintain direct control over your dog because of the procedure is one of those exceptions. Now, as we're talking about medical facilities, an individual with a disability must be allowed to have their service animal present with them within the medical facility, even if they're an inpatient consumer. So if someone is admitted to the hospital and they're ambulatory, meaning they're able to get up and walk around and they're able to take their dog out and relieve the dog, they're able to feed the dog, they're able to care for the dog, or they're able to find someone other than staff to take care of the dog, then they must be allowed to have the dog with them, even if the task the dog performs can be performed by the staff. So for instance, a blind person has a service dog. Sometimes people, inpatient people at a medical facility are able to get up and walk around and go to the lounge or go to the cafeteria or move around to the hospital. And just because a staff member can guide them doesn't mean that they should not be allowed to have their service dog with them. Likewise, someone whose dog is trained to pick up dropped items, just because you can call the nurse's station and have someone come in and pick up something you might have dropped is not a reason to exclude the dog, which is trained to pick up dropped items. Now, in medical facilities, there are some exceptions, and the exceptions are based upon what we go back to, that direct threat, significant risk to the health or safety of others that cannot be eliminated by a modification of policies, practices, and procedures. So if, for instance, in a medical facility, there happens to be equipment, life-sustaining equipment present in an ICU. In that particular room where the medical equipment, the life-sustaining equipment is present, the dog can be excluded from that area. In an OR, where you're in a sterile environment, or if you're entering into a room that is an isolation room where anybody who goes in must don a gown or wear a mask and gloves and boots and scrub in before they enter the room, it's not reasonable to expect a service animal to undergo those precautions. So under those circumstances, a service animal can be excluded from that area of the medical facility, but just that area of the medical facility. Now, one of the frequent calls we get are from people who go to doctor's offices and they're not allowed to take their dogs into an exam room. When you go into an exam room, you are in your street clothes. If you go into the room in your street clothes, that is not a sterile environment. So for instance, I'm a blue-eyed redhead, pretty fair complected, who spent too much time in the sun when I was younger. So from time to time, I go to a dermatologist and I have to have a surgery to remove some skin cancer. My dog accompanies me into the exam room, into the room where I'm going to have that surgery, because I am going to remain in my street clothes. The doctor is in his street clothes or her street clothes. And that is not a sterile environment. The only sterile environment is the actual site where the surgery is taking place on my body, but not the room itself. So service animals should not be excluded from exam rooms. So on our website, serviceanimals.info, under the resources link, we have several different guidance documents which focus upon such things as hotels, restaurants, taxi cabs, stadiums. And one of the pieces of information that we have is called the Guidelines for Environmental Control in Health Care Facilities. And it's published by the Centers for Disease Control. And there is an excerpt from that document concerning service animals in healthcare facilities. And it's a really valuable document along with the other documents. So if you're a medical facility and want to take a look at that, it is available. Every medical facility should have guidelines for environmental infection control in healthcare facilities as a reference guide in their office. And it is there is a 2-page excerpt from there that deals specifically with service animals. So what happens if, under the circumstances, you need to properly exclude a service animal? when that is necessary, because either the animal poses a direct threat or for other reasons the dog is being excluded, then you must allow the individual with a disability to still enjoy the goods and services of the public accommodation without the dog being present. Allergies and fear of animals are not reasons to exclude an individual with a disability accompanied by a service dog. Individuals who are disabled, like individuals based upon race, color, creed, ethnicity, gender, are considered a protected class. And allergies and fear of animals are generally not disabling conditions. In fact, statistically, an allergy to dog dander rises to the level of a disability in only 0.005%. In other words, that's about 1 in 20,000 people have such a severe allergy to dog dander that it rises to the level of a disability. So for instance, if a person is in a restaurant and another patron complains about the dog and says, "I'm allergic to dogs," then it is up to the person with the allergy to move, not the individual with the service dog. So let's talk about the interaction of the Americans with Disabilities Act with other laws. Now, as I said, the Americans with Disabilities Act is a federal law. Article 6 of the United States Constitution, which is known as the principle of supremacy, basically says that a state cannot make a law which violates the federal law. So, for instance, all states in the United States have protections for people who are disabled and who are accompanied by service animals. In fact, 37 of the states provide criminal remedies for violation of their state laws. Usually they're a second-degree misdemeanor. But a state can make a law which is more permissive. They can't make one that's more restrictive, but they can make laws that are more permissive. So for instance, there are some states which, even though the implementing regulations of the ADA concerning service animals, which were disseminated in 2011, actually it was March 15th, 2011, they redefined a service animal as a dog. It used to say a service animal is any animal which has been individually trained. And in 2011, that changed to any dog. Now, there are some states who still allow other animals. So in those states, they can make a law which is more permissive and allows you to be accompanied by a service pig or a bird or whatever species of animal, a cat. But under the Americans with Disabilities Act, it is only a dog. But in those states, you are allowed to be accompanied by a service animal that is something other than a dog. Now, as an example of laws that are more restrictive, there are some states which require documentation. They cannot enforce those laws. They would violate the Americans with Disabilities Act if they enforced the law requiring identification. There are states, a couple states up in the northeast part of the United States, which have laws that say your dog must be kept on a blaze orange leash, or another law the state next to it says that the dog must be kept on a blue collar and leash. The Americans with Disabilities Act and its implementing regulations prohibit the requirement that a dog wear specific apparel or have specific types of leashes or any sort of documentation. So that is an example of laws that might be a little more restrictive, as well as some that might be a little more permissive. Many municipalities, such as county governments and city governments, have prohibitions of discrimination. So let's talk about discrimination. When we say discrimination, what is discrimination? A lot of people don't really understand exactly what it means, or sometimes may not recognize when discrimination occurs. And what I'd like to do is I would like to use the circumstances of going to a restaurant. Going to a restaurant is a good way to examine what is discrimination, because we can describe it by going to a restaurant. So let's say we go to a restaurant and we walk into the restaurant and the hostess at the door says, "Oh, no dogs allowed. You can't bring the dog in here." No matter how much you try to talk to them and explain it's a service dog, nope, no dogs allowed. The health department doesn't allow us to have pets. Well, service dogs are not pets. Health departments can't make rules and laws that violate the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the Americans with Disabilities Act says we have a right to enter into a restaurant with our service dog, even though the health department may have restrictions upon having pets or dogs in the restaurant. So that is what is known as a denial of benefit. It's very clear. You know the discrimination is occurring because you're being denied access to the facility. So let's say, though, they do let you in the restaurant. And restaurants generally group people together as they're sitting so that it's more efficient for the serving staff to help them out. You know, they don't have to run from one end of the restaurant to the other to assist their patrons and serve them. So you're seated with the rest of the patrons in the restaurant, and over there to your left, somebody's getting their water. Over there in front of you, someone's getting their order taken. And the people over to the right, they finished their meal and they got their bill, and here you sit. You've been sitting there for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, waiting and waiting and waiting for someone to come over and serve you while everyone around you is being served. That is what is known as an unequal benefit. You are not treated on an equal par with the other people around you. So that is an unequal benefit. Well, as I said, usually they group people together so that it's easy for the server. But let's say you go into the restaurant and they're like, "Oh no, we're not going to seat you with the rest of the people. We're going to put you over here. We're going to put you over by the doors to the kitchen." You know, kitchens can get quite loud because there's a lot of people working in there. They're talking, you know, they're having their conversations. And so while you're trying to have your meal, you're dealing with all the noise. Or they sit you over by the bathroom, not a very favorable place to sit. You're sitting there eating your meal, and the whole time you're there, you're listening to toilets flush. That is what is known as a separate benefit. You are being separated from the rest of the people in the restaurant. Now, the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination based upon disability. And few people realize that non-disabled people are also protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act. And how is that so? That is what is known as discrimination by association. So let's say we go to a restaurant and I've got my guide dog with me, and I'm there with the rest of my family, or I'm meeting a colleague for lunch, and I'm denied access. Now, they're not denying the person I'm with access, they're denying me access. But my family is not going to go into the restaurant and have their meal while I sit outside and wait for them. So those individuals are able to file a charge of discrimination because they are being discriminated by association. Now, we referred to Title V, and we mentioned that Title V has some what we call miscellaneous provisions. One of those miscellaneous provisions is discrimination through retaliation. So it is prohibited for individuals to be discriminated against by being retaliated against, maybe by getting less favorable treatment, or by being intimidated by the place of public accommodation. So discrimination through retaliation and intimidation is protected under Title V of the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's another provision within Title V too that says that an individual with a disability is not required to accept an aid, a service, accommodation, or benefit that that person wishes to refuse. Now, I want to explain how that happens and what that exactly means. Back in the mid-'80s, there was a problem at a local amusement park in the Tampa area that had very expensive birds. Someone snuck a dog in, a little pocket dog in her purse, and during the bird show, the dog jumped out of her purse, ran around, chased these $50,000 birds all over the place, and caused quite a commotion. So a law was passed in the state of Florida that said any place that keeps or displays live animals must have the right to refuse access to an individual with a disability accompanied by a service dog, provided that they offer that person another way to enjoy the goods and services. So a blind person would be assigned a sighted guide. A person who uses a wheelchair, for instance, may be assigned someone who's going to push their wheelchair for them instead of their dog pulling the wheelchair for them. So we went in 1993, a bill was introduced that removed that section of state law because it violated the Americans with Disabilities Act by requiring an individual accompanied by a service animal to accept an aid, accommodation, or benefit that person wished to refuse. They wouldn't have brought their guide dog if they were going to be asking for a sighted guide, and they're not required to accept the sighted guide. So let's talk a little bit about the types of relief that a person can get. So let's say you feel as if you've been discriminated against. How can you get recourse? What recourse do you have? What do you do? And what is the kind of relief you can get? Well, first of all, one kind of relief you can get is what they call injunctive relief. An injunction is a court order that says you have to do or not do something. So for instance, let's say that a place discriminates against you because of your service dog. They may be required to modify their policy and to stop discriminating against people by modifying their policies so that people with disabilities can be accompanied by service dogs. They may be required to post signs that say service animals welcome. They may be required to train their staff about the requirements of the ADA as they pertain to service animals. That is what is called injunctive relief. Now, one of the things that's really important before we go on to the other types of relief is that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, individuals have the right to file a private action. In other words, a person who feels they've been discriminated against because of their disability has a right to hire an attorney and to sue the company that discriminated against them. What most people don't know is that there are serious limitations to doing that, because the only thing that that person can get is an injunction against the company. Under a right of private action, the only relief that a person can get is injunctive relief and attorney's fees. So under those circumstances, the only people that benefit are the attorneys. Only the Department of Justice can get punitive damages. Now, punitive damages means that there is a fine associated with it, and the Department of Justice might levy a fine that the company might need to pay as a result of the discrimination. However, only the Department of Justice can impose punitive damages. Another type of relief that is not available under a right of private action is compensatory damages. In other words, the individual is compensated for the discrimination that occurs. So let's say, for instance, you're denied access to a hotel. You booked a room, you paid for 3 days, you go there, they won't let you stay in the hotel. The hotel costs $150 a night. you're entitled to recover $450. Or let's say a person who uses a wheelchair is going down a ramp that is not compliant with the ADA, and they fall out of their wheelchair and are injured. They're able to sue that company for compensatory damages because of the injury. But those are what they call actual injuries. You're not allowed to, like, you're denied access to someplace and you can't sue them for $100,000. I actually had an individual that came to us, and we worked with that person to try to resolve an issue with a company, and an attorney contacted them and promised them they could get $100,000 if they sued this big company. And I told them, I said, you're going to be sorely disappointed, because that's just not going to happen. The only person that's going to benefit is going to be the attorney. So how do you file a complaint? Filing a complaint is something that if you feel you've been discriminated against and you really want to make a change, how do you file a complaint? Well, the very first thing that you should do as soon as possible after the incident occurs is to write a narrative. Write down as much detail about the incident as you can, so that you have it for the record. You want to write down the name of the company, the location of the company, who you spoke with, what they said, who might have witnessed it. Write that narrative, because that narrative is going to form the foundation of your complaint. Now, as far as filing a complaint, the ADA provides what is known as a statute of limitations. You have a limited amount of time in which to file a complaint. Currently, that statute of limitations under the ADA is 180 days. So you need to file the complaint within 180 days of the date of the incident. It's important to file the complaint with the correct department. So this narrative that you've just written is going to be filed with either the Department of Justice or the Department of Transportation, or whatever federal agency has enforcement jurisdiction over that. Now, I will caution you, on the DOJ, if you go to file a complaint with the DOJ and you file it online, make your narrative 500 words or less, because if it's 501, the last word is going to be cut off. You know, they have a limitation of 500 words or less. You can file a complaint with more than one jurisdiction. So let's say, for instance, you happen to be here in Tampa, and you have a discrimination complaint you want to file. You can file that complaint with the federal government, the DOJ or the DOT. You can also, in the state of Florida, it's a second-degree misdemeanor. You can call law enforcement and you can file a complaint alleging discrimination and violation of Florida's criminal statute. Again, it's a second-degree misdemeanor, but I will caution you, if you're going to call, and this is true no matter where you are in any state in the United States, if you call law enforcement and you want to file a complaint, probably the first thing they're going to say is, oh, they don't handle this type of complaint. You need to file that complaint with the DOJ. They only file criminal complaints. Well, in the state of Florida, it is a criminal complaint. Not long ago, I had an issue with a company, and when I called the sheriff's office and said I wanted to file a complaint, they said, oh no, you've got to file that with the Better Business Bureau. I don't know how the Better Business Bureau enforces state law. And even though I cited the statute and gave them the statute number and gave it to them word for word, practically out of the statute, it took me probably 30 minutes in order to get the complaint filed and get to someone who was willing to actually look at the statute. So if you, whatever state you live in, look at the statute for that particular state and see what remedies it provides, whether it's a criminal offense or a civil offense. You can find most of the state statutes on our website. Again, that's serviceanimals.info. And under the laws and regulations, right now we have 35 of the 50 states listed. Our site is very dynamic, so there's always new information being put up on our website. So go there and take a look at the law. You can either read it or you can download it so that you have it. You can also file complaints with your city or county. As I said, cities and counties have, many of them have prohibitions of discrimination. Hillsborough County does, as does the city of Tampa, and most municipalities have prohibitions of discrimination. One of the best places to file a complaint is with your local protection and advocacy agency. Most states, and I believe every state, is required to have what they call a PNA, a protection and advocacy agency. Generally, those agencies are referred to by the words disability rights and the name of the state. So here in Florida, it's Disability Rights Florida, Disability Rights Georgia, Disability Rights Michigan. Each of the states have a PNA. The DOJ is swamped with complaints, and they will only take a complaint which has a very high public impact, which means that if I go to a mom and pop hotel and I'm denied a room at that motel, but I go to a major, say, international chain, or say you go to a major international chain and we both file complaints, your complaint is more likely to get the attention of the DOJ than mine, because that's what they're looking for. They have limited resources, so they're going to file complaints with against those organizations and those companies that have a high public impact. And don't forget to file a complaint with the corporate office. Now, of course, if it's a mom and pop place, they are the corporate office. But if it's a major international corporation or national corporation, file a complaint with the corporate office. If you need help filing complaints, you're not exactly sure how to do it, you want help writing your narrative, that's one of the free services that Advocates for Service Animal Partners provide. So if you find yourself in a situation in which you feel you've been discriminated against, one of the first things you can do is call 855-ASAP-211. It's a 24-hour hotline. There will be someone there to speak with you, to help you advocate for yourself, and or to speak with the management or the staff at the place where you are and help them understand the law and provide them the resources so they can make a better decision. If you're unable to resolve the complaint, please get in touch with us. We'll help walk you through the writing of a narrative and the filing of a complaint.
Thank you, Marion. Advocates for Service Animal Partners provides policymaking consultation, implementation of standard operating procedures, and in-service training for your staff. If you would like to support our work, please go to our webpage, serviceanimals.info, and click on the tab Support Us. Please enter any questions you have in the chat box at this time if you haven't already. When we finish, if you have unanswered questions after the following Q&A, please send an email to advocacy411@gmail.com and note in the subject line question. All participants will receive an evaluation form by email. Please help us by completing this form and returning it to us.
What we could do too is if there's anybody who's got a question, you can raise your hand by let's see, pressing Alt-Y, raise your hand, and then we can send you a request to unmute. You can ask your question live if you'd like.
Yes, from Asia. Asia, if you can, there you go.
Hello.
Go
I
ahead.
actually have two questions. I'm coming from Ohio. Your hotline, is there an option to text rather than call?
Oh, yes, yes. You can text that number as
fantastic.
well. Mhm.
Fantastic. And then my second question is, I'm interested in taking a trip by train. And do you know of any restrictions on trains with service dogs or anything like that?
Oh, you're going to be riding Amtrak?
That's what I'm interested in, yes.
Okay.
I haven't done it before.
I've never had a problem on Amtrak. My wife and I travel by Amtrak quite a bit. We love the train. If it wasn't for the fact that it takes so long to get to Baltimore to visit our daughter by train, we would take it. In fact, we might just do it just for the fun of it, but we love the train. We've never had a problem. The train is a place of public accommodation, and it is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Transportation, because they are a private entity that provides a public accommodation, but they are a rail service, and so as such, they are under the jurisdiction of the Department of Transportation. You shouldn't have any problems, though, on Amtrak.
Awesome. Thank you.
If you do, 855 ASAP 211.
Yes, I have the number saved.
Very good. Thank you, Asia, and welcome.
Thank you.
Michael, you have a question?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Why is it that they allow Marion Guysala still to, no, never mind. My question is, you mentioned, Marion, about the restrictive law in Tampa regarding the service animals being allowed into the area where the birds were and so on. And you mentioned that a bill was introduced in 1993, but you never said what happened.
Oh, well,
I assume I know, but I thought
I thought I did. That section of the law was repealed because it did violate the Americans with Disabilities Act. So
right.
It was sponsored by a guy named Victor Chris, and actually at the time, Representative and Senator Chris was a freshman. It was his first bill he introduced, and the first bill that got passed by him. So yeah, it did pass, and that section of law was removed.
And this whole webinar is absolutely wonderful, and thank you for doing it.
I appreciate your support, Mike, and thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have a question from Consuelo. And you have to unmute yourself.
While we're waiting for Consuelo, I will say Michael Hinkson wrote a book
Hello.
called Thunderdog about his experience on September 11th in the World Trade Center. So pick up Thunderdog. It was a New York Times bestseller. There's a plug for you, Mike.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead, Consuelo.
Okay, I know that there are certain laws regarding nursing homes, federal or state. I am a guide dog user, and I live in Mississippi. I know the laws of Mississippi, and I know the statutes of Mississippi. But my issue is regarding shot. Are they allowed to ask for that, even though you know what they are allowed to ask and not allowed to ask?
So what you're asking is a nursing home or other medical facility allowed to ask you for proof that your dog has been vaccinated?
Yes.
No, they are not.
So how do I go about doing an injunction? Because it will be time for my dog to have her rabies shots again.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's what I would say. There's a few options. One is on our website, there is a document under the resources page called Frequently Asked Questions About Service Animals. Now, it doesn't address specifically the issue of vaccinations, but it does say that no documentation concerning the training, certification, or other documentation concerning the service animal can be required as a condition of access. If they want to talk to me, you can give them 855 ASAP 211, or if they want something a little more authoritative, they can call 800-514-0301, and they'll talk to someone at the Department of Justice who will tell them the same thing.
Even though they're not listening, but I'm working on that.
Well, I'll tell you what, Consuelo. If you continue to have an issue, give me a call, give me a name and number. I will give them a call, and I tend to be pretty persuasive.
So I'm a very good reader, and I know a little bit about the laws because I am in the process of getting ready to start law school in August. So I'm just trying to figure out what my obligation is as far as to put things in place to where I'm not being denied to go wherever I with my service dog within the law.
Okay. Well, again, if you'd like, if you can't convince them, give me a call. As I said, I can be very convincing sometimes, and if I'm not convincing enough, I can offer them the number to call the Department of Justice, and I'm sure they'll be pretty convincing in and of themselves, just because that's who they're talking to. So if you have an issue, that's what we're here to do. The services we offer for advocacy and support for individuals who use service dogs are free. We're not going to charge you for it. We're willing to help you out. Give us a call and give us a name and number. And like I say, we'll work with them and help them to see the light, so to speak.
Okay.
Well, thank you for your question. Thanks for joining the webinar.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Who's next?
We have Marguerite. She is unmuting. There you go. Welcome.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for this organization, because so many times I've been rejected access and I didn't know who to talk to. So it's nice
now
to
you know.
have you guys, and I'm excited that you've launched this. I've had a number of situations, but I want to talk about Costco. One time I have a Papillon. Actually, I have a semi-retired psychiatric service dog, Papillon, and I have a service dog in training at this point, Papillon, and he's already performing tasks for me, and he's too small to be able to be on the ground for one of the tasks that he does. It's actually, I'm still trying to figure out the difference between work and task, but he alerts me to some of the psychiatric symptom, and helps mitigate that. And if I'm in the store, I would need to carry him in a sling because he's really small.
Mhm.
And one day I came into Costco, and the guy says, "Nah, you can't come in. He has to be on the ground. The service department can't can't come in with the dog on a sling." And I was just too tired to deal with it. And I know I could have dealt with it and said something like, well, that's his working position. And I just walked away. I just couldn't deal with it that day. But I know you talked about, he actually has, I also have low blood sugar, and he does the same thing. I mean, that's not the main purpose, but he's alerted me for the low blood sugar as well, and helped me out. But I think I should just say, okay, would I just say that's his working position? He works from the sling. I have a disability that requires him to be in the sling. Is that what I would say to the guy next time?
Yeah. And again, if you go on our website and under the frequently asked questions about service animals published by the DOJ, I believe that is covered. I don't know exactly. It's a pretty lengthy document, so I don't know everything that's covered. But again, if you're unable to resolve it yourself, that's one of the things that we do. That's a service that we provide free of charge to individuals with disabilities. So feel free to give us a call. I would say that rather than dealing with the person who's going to be checking your ID, meaning your Costco ID as you walk through the door, if you have a problem, ask for the manager.
Right. And I guess what I'm saying, just want to get back to the sling. And I know that psychiatric service dog tasks are not as well known in all the communities. It's something that there's so much potential with that. I can tell you that this dog does things for me that no medication can do.
Yes, I've heard that before.
It's amazing what this dog can do, and the kind of pressure that he puts, and just the things he does to he licks my face and does some things that no medication, and if I took a medication, it would knock me out. Mm-hmm. And he actually, stops these episodes. And I don't think there's enough knowledge about the psychiatric. So that's why I bring it up. I know the answer, but I'm bringing it up because there's a lot that has been done for guide dogs and, seizures and all that. And I just want to advocate for that.
Okay.
That's why I'm bringing it up.
Yes,
The
and-
little dog on a sling can be a fantastic service dog. That's all I'm saying.
And one of the things that I intend to do is I've networked quite a bit with people who are very involved in the issues of psychiatric service dogs. And one of the things that I intend to do very shortly, very soon, is to have a podcast and maybe a series of podcasts about some of the tasks that dogs perform. And because psychiatric service dogs are not well known and very misunderstood, I've got some good people in our ASAP network who use psychiatric service dogs, train psychiatric service dogs. So I hope to have a podcast about that very soon. And we'll post that again on YouTube. And the reason we'll be posting things on YouTube is because, again, YouTube provides closed captioning, so it can be activated and anybody can access it. So we'll link to those YouTube pages off of our website. So if you haven't subscribed to our email list, do that so that you know when some of these other programs and when updates to our website are going to be made. Also, you can, we do have a Facebook group, and it's facebook.com/ASAP411. So you can follow us on Facebook, and you can get information there about when some of the website releases are made and when some of these other programs are going to be held.
Thank you.
Where
Thank
are you
you.
calling from, Marguerite?
Colorado.
Oh, beautiful country.
Thank you.
Spend a week
No,
there one day.
Yeah, it's a good, I think the state has very good protection, and depending on where you go in the state, there's parts of the states that are very backwards, and then there's parts of the states that, but it's a pro-friendly, I think it's a friendly state for service dogs of all types. It's just not everybody's educated, and I have found that even some of the medical facilities can be the worst sometimes in terms of understanding this.
And again, we have on our resources page at serviceanimals.info, we do have that guidelines for environmental infection control in healthcare facilities. So if you do run across that, or you know somebody that could use that document, refer them to the website. It's available either to read off the website, or they can download it and print it, and they can maintain it for their records.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marguerite.
There are no other hands raised at this time, Marion.
Okay, well, anybody who's still here, I've heard quite a few people leave. I know this was a 1-hour presentation, and it's gone over with the questions and answers. I appreciate you joining us. If you know of anybody who would like to be a part of this webinar, we're going to be holding another one at 8 o'clock. However, we're going to be restricted as to how many people we're going to be able to let in, because we do have time constraints. So if you have anybody else who wants to join, if they can get with us by 5 o'clock Eastern time, we should be able to get them into the webinar this evening at 8 p.m. So again, this has been recorded, and we're going to make this recording available on our YouTube page sometime shortly after we get it all edited. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Again, join our email list. You'll stay in touch with what's going on with Advocates for Service Animal Partners. Be the first to know about issues that we're dealing with, other webinars and podcasts that we're doing, and also follow us on Facebook /ASAP411. So thank you very much for joining us. Again, I'm Marion Guysala. Thank you, Marilyn Schaefer and Mary Schock, for being a part of this organization and serving on our board of directors and helping me with this webinar today. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and hope to talk to you all soon. Thank you.